Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I really do hope that you're doing remarkably well. And love to each and every one of you. And don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa because you still need to keep lovely and warm in this cold weather. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Bernard and I'm from Charleston in West Virginia and have lived here pretty much all my life in a Georgian-style lower floor apartment with a verdant courtyard garden in the French Quarter, which is on the southeast corner of the peninsula with Broad, Meeting, East Bay and South Market Street as outer perimeters. I'm often described as a little eccentric, avant-garde and unorthodox kind of person, which I suppose is probably true. I'm also a very studious, well-read person with a passionate zeal for books, which may be why my apartment resembles a rather arresting, grandiose library with its lavish velvety red carpets, exquisite golden red striped upholstered armchairs, large marble fireplaces, and bookshelves bursting with books from bygone days, as well as more modern stuff, of course. I'm in my late 60s now, and have never married, nor have I sired any children, which of course has meant that over the years, among many of my friends, there has been idle speculation and gossip that I'm either a closet gay or asexual, which of course is not true, as nothing could be further from the truth. I think I just never met the right woman, which does happen, believe it or not. I was not prepared to just settle down with anyone just for the sake of appearances, or to prevent myself from becoming lonely or isolated. I mean, that would be ridiculous. One of my best friends, Peter, tried to encourage me to get married to a girl I met 20 years ago once, whom I dated for a short while. I remember him earnestly saying, "You don't want to end up all on your own," as to which I replied, "I don't want to be married to someone who could potentially make my life very miserable." I know being on your own does get a bad rap, and people think that such a solitary, bleak existence is desperately cheerless and sad, or morose, but that too is very false. If you have friends and you live alone, life can indeed be very enjoyable and pleasant, although one is inclined to become rather set in one's ways, which isn't altogether a good thing, I suppose. My strange story that ultimately led me to learn about an outlandish, stupendous Bigfoot encounter happened to me when I was driving in a remote area of Virginian countryside after having visited a reclusive friend of mine who lives in an old log cabin in these parts and is definitely more unconventional and even more eccentric than I am. On this occasion the heavens had opened and it was raining very hard. I stopped my car to pick up a bedraggled-looking hitchhiker who was walking down a country lane in the pouring rain with a battered suitcase in her hand. I think she was walking to the bus stop, but I couldn't be sure. Even if it hadn't been raining, I would have stopped and offered the young lady a lift because she looked so alone and so desperately sad. There was something about how small, fragile and vulnerable she looked on this rambling, quaint country road, surrounded by mountainous valleys and dreamy forests, that really got my attention. I could see her wet clothes were clinging to her body like rags, and her long dark hair hung limply around her face in ragatails. She did look a sorry sight, rather reminding me of a drowned kitten. Now I ask you, how could you drive past such a desperate sight? You would have to have a heart of stone to do so. "Would you like a lift?" I asked the young woman, opening the side door of my Jeep. "You're getting soaked to the skin. Climb in." The pretty young woman looked really grateful and climbed onto the seat with her small suitcase clasped in her hands, which she straddled to her knees on the front seat. "It's awfully kind of you," she said. "I'm soaked to the skin." "I can see that," I said. "The rain is coming down in buckets. It's getting nasty out there. Do you mind me asking you, where are you going?" I asked. "I don't really know," she said reflectively. "I was thinking I'd head for Charleston. I want to get as far away from here as I possibly can." "Is it that bad?" I asked. "I'm afraid so," she said. For a while I continued to drive, but I could tell that the woman was visibly upset. She kept wiping tears away from her blue eyes. They were covered in pink blotches that led me to believe that she had been crying considerably. "Are you all right?" I asked. "You do seem rather upset." I'll be fine, she said, straightening up in her seat and staring blankly outside the window with a vacant expression on her face, as if she was trying very hard not to think at all. Where are you going to be staying in Charleston? I asked. I've not thought that far ahead, she said. I'll make my decisions when I finally get there. Look, I said, I don't want to interfere, nor do I want to put my nose in your business, but I do happen to have a spare room in my apartment in Charleston that you are more than welcome to use while you find your bearings, if that helps, of course. The woman's face brightened. Are you sure you don't mind? That would be a marvellous help. How old are you? I asked. You're not too young to be running away from home, are you? How do you know I'm running away from home? The woman asked me, looking bewildered. Is it that obvious? I'm afraid so, I said. The suitcase is a wee bit of a giveaway, shall we say? I'm 20, said the girl. Good, I said. At least you're old enough to make your own decisions. Do you mind me asking why you're running away? I know it's none of my business, but you know the saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. I am a good listener, you know. You're not some kind of a therapist, she asked, looking at me rather alarmed. No, not at all. But I am a very good listener, as I said. Would you like to talk about it? Not really, she said. Didn't think so, I said. What's your name, by the way? I'm Bernard, and it's a pleasure to meet you, even if these are rather inauspicious conditions under the circumstances. I'm Heidi, she said, and ditto. Now that is an unusual name, I reflected. I think I quite like it, actually. For a long time we drove, and you could have heard a pin drop in the car. It wasn't an uncomfortable, prickly silence that needed to be broken, nor was it fraught with awkwardness, but it was simply two unpretentious, relaxed people choosing to just say nothing at all, which meant that we weren't uncomfortable, just quiet. Are you married? Asked Heidi suddenly. How would your wife feel about me staying over in your spare room? You don't have a habit of just bringing waifs and strays home, do you? Like abandoned cats, dogs, raccoons, or piteous people like myself? No, to both those questions. I've never been married. I live alone, nor do I rescue waifs or strays, although that might not be a bad idea, come to think of it. I've always rather fancied raising a raccoon. There's something about the dark patches around their eyes that really softens the heart and beguiles me ever so slightly. Heidi laughed. I like them too, she said. I always have. You haven't got any ulterior motives in picking me up, have you? She asked. Just so that you know, I'm not that kind of a girl. I chuckled. No offence, but you're young enough to be my daughter. I'm in my 40s, just so that you know. Good, she said. I just had to make sure. Sometimes people can end up in sticky situations when they get their wires crossed and misunderstandings arise. I do mean that some older men like younger women, if you know what I mean. Well, not me, I assured her. I tend to stick to women of my own age. It's a generational thing, you know. You look a little brighter, I said. When I first picked you up, you looked like you had the weight of the world on your shoulders back there on that remote country road, in the middle of nowhere, if you don't mind my saying. You are very nosy, she said. You're dying for me to tell you why I'm running away, aren't you? I can tell. You're just literally bursting at the seams to know why. I raised a quizzical eyebrow. I'm a writer. I'm naturally nosy and snoopy by nature. I'm very interested in stories. Like yours, of course. As an aspiring novelist, I'll tell you this. I'm always looking for good fodder for my stories and fresh inspirational ideas. You want a story, said Heidi. I'll give you one. And it's a true story too. And it's also about why I'm running away. And just so you know, I don't even care if you don't believe me. Why wouldn't I believe you? I said. Because to an outsider like yourself, it might all seem nonsensical and fictitious, but I assure you it's true. I highly doubt I would disbelieve you. You see, as a writer, Heidi, you have to open your mind to everything. Otherwise it restricts your creativity. Why don't you try me? I think you might be surprised how unbiased and non-discriminatory I can actually be. So this was Heidi's story that she shared with me on my journey back to Charleston. I live on a farm close to where you actually picked me up, she told me. We have several acres of cornfields and timberland there, and I live in a large colonial farmhouse. You know the type, 2 stories, whitewashed walls and a grey slate roof. I actually have 2 sisters and a brother, but they left home when I was still wearing diapers. My parents never planned for me, but I just came along unexpectedly. I suppose you would describe me as a late lamb. Growing up, it was very lonely for me, as you can imagine. I had no brothers and sisters, and my mother homeschooled me, so I didn't even get an opportunity of interacting with other kids my own age. My parents weren't even social or at all gregarious, and so I only got to see other kids at church, but I tended to just hide away from them. I was so painfully shy. My parents toiled and laboured arduously, managing all the affairs on our farm, so they just let me do my own thing after my studies. I would spend ages out there in the glorious woods, and it was my little home away from home, my little secret retreat or shaded verdant oasis, so to speak. And I loved it out there, as it was so tranquil and peaceful. I also enjoyed watching the deer, the squirrels and chipmunks, and all kinds of indigenous wildlife. Other kids might just go and sleep in their bedroom, but I would take a blanket and go and lie by the silvery stream on a smooth rocky outcrop and go to sleep there. I loved lying under the shade of the tall oak trees, listening to the pretty bird song and the white water crashing against the rocks. It was the best feeling in the entire world, and I even read my books and ate my sandwiches out there, as it was so serene and breathtakingly beautiful, almost like going to the beach, I suppose. How did your parents feel about you spending so much time in the woods? If it was my kid, I might be rather concerned. There are predators out there, surely. They weren't bothered at all. They just let me be. I think they've already raised 3 children, and by the time I came along, they were enervated and quite simply exhausted. That's why they say the last child has it very easy, because the parents loosen the reins considerably. I know my elder sister Julie had it really tough, as both my parents were incredibly strict on her. I gather she had to be in bed by 6 sharp every night, but my parents were never bothered what time I went to bed. In truth, I think they barely noticed my coming or goings. Well, go on with your story, I said. I'm champing at the bit to hear it all. One day when I was about 10 years old, I'd been reading my book by the stream, and I fell fast asleep by the water with a blanket over my body. For some strange reason, I've always needed to be covered when I go to sleep. I'm a little like that myself, I agreed. I don't like to be naked without a cover over my body, if you know what I mean. Well, I suddenly just woke up because I felt something poking at me. And that was when I saw him. I couldn't believe what I was actually seeing. He was about 4 foot tall and covered in hazelnut hair with auburn highlights, and he was ever so cute. He had a shaggy coat of hair, exactly the same as an old English sheepdog. Have you ever seen an old English sheepdog before? She asked me. No, I can't say I have, I admitted. I'm not au fait with all the dog breeds. Never mind, all you really need to know about him is that his hair was incredibly shaggy. He definitely looked very human, but there were aspects to him that rather reminded me of an ape, like the overlong arms that he had, and the distinctive pyramid-shaped head, and, of course, his brow ridge. I was not remotely afraid of him. Maybe I should have been, but I wasn't. The creature was so friendly towards me, and had the most beautiful eyes that I've ever seen in my entire life. As I told you, I'm a reticent, reserved sort of person, but this little critter made me forget my self-effacing shyness. Before long, we became firm friends, and I would meet up with him at the same time every day, except for Sundays and Mondays, as for some reason he was never available on those days. Well, where do you think he came from? I asked. Well, I know that his family are nomads and they travel all over the place, but they've lived on our land on and off for many generations in a cave there. I know the exact spot. It's close to the stream on a high rocky elevation overlooking the waterfall. I can see why they live there. It's as pretty as a picture, and the sizable cave is very inconspicuous. Most people would never even know it existed. That's how invisible it is. If you don't mind me asking you, how do you actually know about this cave? Well, Peekaboo told me. He told me exactly where his family lived. So, I take it that Peekaboo is your friend. Is that his real name? No, not at all. I can't actually pronounce his real name. He speaks a very strange language, but I do know a few words. But the trouble is they speak so fast. I called him Peekaboo because he always enjoys playing that game, so it kind of stuck. Besides, it really suits him. It's an ingenious name. I like it, I said. Please go on. I'm enjoying your story. Well, as I said, it started from when I was about 10, my friendship with Peekaboo, I mean. I kept my companionship with him a very firm secret, as I didn't want my family to know about him, as I knew they would disapprove. Peekaboo was also as shy and reticent as I am. His kind really are. They tend to prefer to keep in the shadows and not be seen. I only saw his family a handful of times myself, but Peekaboo told me they liked me a lot, but weren't so sure about the rest of my family. They never really liked or trusted my dad, although they thought he was very funny. They would see him a lot, although he never knew they were scrutinising him. He would regularly frequent the woods for hunting purposes. They said he was an atrocious hunter. Peekaboo's family had never seen anything like it before, and they would laugh heartily at how terrible he was at hunting and how he scared all the wildlife away because he was so cack-handed with his rifle, although he falsely always assumed that he was an accomplished hunter. I do remember Peekaboo concocted some extraordinary reenactments of my father's cloddish, bungling attempts to hunt. Oh, I laughed so much. My stomach was hurting, it was aching so much. Peekaboo would pretend to be holding a rifle, and then he would swagger all over the place like a drunk, illustrating in his remarkable performance how ham-handed and ungainly my dad actually was. It was so hilarious to watch. Sometimes his entire family felt so sorry for my ponderous dad that when he shot something that he hadn't killed, Peekaboo's mother would actually go and finish the injured animal off gently and leave it lying there for my dad to collect, so that my father would assume he'd actually killed it and would be none the wiser. The funny thing is, my father believes he's a great hunter, but he's so butterfingered on that rifle of his, it's a joke, really. How do you know about all this, when Peekaboo did not speak any English? I asked. I'm not really sure. I think Peekaboo was telepathic, because he always knew what I was thinking, and when I asked him a question, the answer would just flood into my mind in audible words. That's how he speaks to me all the time. It was as natural as speaking out loud, but I've never ever had that experience with anybody else before, only with Peekaboo. I could look at Peekaboo and he knew exactly what I was saying. It was that direct, and then the answer would flood into my mind. It sounds like he was telepathic to me. How extraordinary. That must have been quite an experience. That is unique, I must say. Everything was unique about Peekaboo. He was my best friend in the entire world, as we would do absolutely everything together, and he made me laugh so much because he was so good at imitating me. If I did something, he would often duplicate what I'd done, and seeing the replay was so funny, and his reenactions of my father's precarious hunting sessions were so hysterical. I promise you, Peekaboo's family would stop literally everything to watch my father go on a hunt, as for them it was like live entertainment. It would be like us stopping our daily rituals to listen to our favourite television programme. I gather they would whistle 3 times and make 4 wood knocks, and then they would all know it was showtime with my father. Peekaboo's family could not wait to watch him make a complete idiot of himself with that rifle of his. I gather for days afterwards they would be reenacting my father's feeble attempts to kill an animal. They found it so funny. What kind of things did you and Peekaboo do together? I asked curiously. Well, we would play peekaboo, obviously, hide and seek. We'd swim in the stream, throw pebbles, play marbles, and all kinds of things. I introduced him to games, and he was very good at puzzles and stuff like that. Now, that is interesting. You mean he knew which piece of the puzzle fit exactly where? Exactly, said Heidi, and he was fast too. He was an incredibly intelligent creature, but after a while I didn't see him as much different to myself. I saw him as completely human, wearing long hair instead of clothing, that's all. Although there were notable differences between us. I mean, he had the most enviable padded feet, that he could walk over any terrain he liked, without getting torn apart like ours would. and he could walk through briars or thorns without getting his skin ripped, because of his shaggy coat, of course. I remember once we were playing hide and seek together, and would you believe it, he was hiding in a hedge of thorns of all things. Would you believe it that there were no cuts on him, only thorns tangled up in his shaggy hair, which did get badly tangled from time to time. I sometimes brought scissors in the wood to cut them out for him. Peekaboo could also run on 4 legs as easily as on 2, and he was the fastest runner you've ever seen. And when he grew big, he would take me on piggybacks everywhere. It was so fun. I remember I used to tap him on the top of his shoulder to get him to go faster, and it was incredible. He would run like the wind on the rocky terrain, and he was smoother than riding on a horse. Now that is something, I said. Another thing about Peekaboo, he knew how to hide. One time he pretended to be a tree, and I couldn't find him anywhere. I kept darting past him, missing him every single time. I just couldn't see him. He thought that was so amusing. I know his family pretend to be trees, and hunters never ever see them. He told me that once, and I believe every word of it, based on my own experience. Well, you know what they say about monkeys and apes. They can hide in plain sight, I said. You're right. His family knew absolutely everything about my family. I mean, details about my family, like the cars they drove and what they did on the farm. But my family knew nothing about Peekaboo. They knew nothing about him nor his family, nothing at all. I think his family could observe everything but remain hidden. It's quite a skill, you know. That is interesting. Tell me, when did you meet the members of his family? Well, I met the father once when we were swimming in the stream together, splashing around. He glided over to watch us, and he didn't hide from me at all. He sat on the rocky outcrop with his eyes pinned on the both of us. Oh, I began to panic when I saw him. Oh, because he was so scary to look at. He was enormous. I mean, really, really colossal. A very intimidating but majestic creature, if ever I did see one. How big would you say he was? I asked. I know you're going to think I'm exaggerating, but I promise you I'm not. I think he was about 9 foot. I could be wrong, of course, and about 800 pounds. He was covered in hair, just like Peekaboo, only it was of a much darker tone, but it did have the red highlights. He also had bald patches on his knee area and under his arms, where the arms rubbed together, you know what I mean, and his shoulders were gargantuan. I'd say they were 4 foot across. He was impressive looking, powerful, very strong, you know. What did he do? Well, he watched us playing together. He seemed pleased to see Peekaboo so very happy, and he just chatted to him for a few minutes in their curiously strange language, and then he just glided away. He was telling Peekaboo to get back soon to the cave because there was fresh squirrel on offer, but Peekaboo had already eaten lunch with me that day because I always brought him peanut butter and jam sandwiches on brown bread. Oh, he loved those. But forget about white bread. He couldn't stand the stuff. I think it was too refined for his liking. What other human food did he like? Oh, Peekaboo just loved bacon sandwiches and brown bread. Best of all, he liked them better than anything else I've ever seen him eat. He also adored my mother's walnut cake and her oat and raisin cookies. And of course he was very partial to peanut butter. He liked fruits and nuts and stuff like that. Oh, and he particularly liked salted chips. He'd lick the salt off them first, and he adored just eating crispy bacon on its own. I think all animals enjoy salt, I said. That's why they have salt licks. What I don't understand is how you managed to keep Peekaboo such a secret from your families for so very long. Oh, it was easier than you think. You see, Peekaboo always knew when any of my family members were coming. He'd be gone or hiding in plain sight before my dad even came to grab me out of the woods. They did not mind me playing there because they saw it made me so happy. After Peekaboo and I became friends, my parents saw a monstrous change in my personality, a good one, of course, because even in church I'd stopped hiding from all the other kids and was interacting more. They couldn't make any sense of it, and even encouraged me once to invite a friend home for tea. I never wanted to play with anybody else but Peekaboo. I loved him so much. It's hard to explain, but he was like a brother to me. Well, that makes sense. What about Peekaboo's mother? Did you ever meet her? Not many times, but I do remember the first time I saw her. She was peeking at me from behind a tree, and I saw this head peering and looking at me. Peekaboo ran to the tree and dragged his mother out to introduce her to me. I remember she was so bashful and terribly shy. At first she avoided eye contact with me, but then she did look directly in my eyes, and I could see incredible kindness. On one occasion she came up to me and placed this beautiful stone on my hand, which was a gift from her. It was like a turquoise crystal, and it was magnificent. I've no idea where she got it from, but I've still got it today. Sounds like some kind of a semi-precious stone that's found here in Virginia. It might be worth something. You should check it out. Never. I want to keep it forever. It has such sentimental value to me. It reminds me of Peekaboo and his family. Even if you gave me $1 million, I'd never ever part with it. Well, that's very understandable, given your special relationship with Peekaboo. The woman suddenly burst into tears. That's just it. I can never have a friendship with Peekaboo ever again, because of my horrible, horrible father. That's why I'm running away, because of him. If I never ever see him again, it'll be too soon. Well, tell me exactly what happened. Well, my father decided to go scouting in the woods to look for deerscat. He wanted to go hunting this Saturday afternoon, and Peekaboo was in the stream, taking a swim. Of course, Peekaboo is very big these days. I never noticed it growing up, because I was with him so much. But he is big. I think he might even be bigger than his father now. I'm not really sure. I gather my father saw him getting out of the stream, and they were only standing yards away from each other. My father began to scream, and for a moment he stared at Peekaboo, and then he ran out of the grove as fast as he could and told us that his legs felt like blocks of cement, they were so heavy beneath him. And he simply couldn't move for a while, and then he began to run. He was certain that Peekaboo was going to kill him, which could not have been further from the truth, but I guess Peekaboo's appearance scared the living daylights out of him. Well, I suppose you can understand that. Well, my mother tried to calm him down, but my father was shaking so much. Even I couldn't imagine what on earth was wrong with him. My mother called out the doctor, who gave him some tranquilizers. He said my dad had had some kind of a terrible shock. It was only the next morning my father told us what had actually happened. My mother gave him a few shots of whiskey to ease and subdue his frazzled nerves, and that seemed to help him to talk. He told us he'd seen a very dangerous monster in the wood, bigger than a bear, that looked like a humanoid ape, and that something needed to be done about it immediately. That was when he began to call the sheriff and so forth, who seemed to think that my father was very drunk. But later that day we did receive a confidential call from a man in the force who assured my father that, in fact, the matter would be dealt with as soon as possible, and he'd be sending the military, who would be coming around in the evening to eliminate the critter for him. You are joking, I said. What did you do? Well, I was terrified. I immediately ran into the sylvan and called out Peekaboo. I just shout out his name very loudly, and he always responds if he's there, of course. Did he come? I asked. Oh, at once. And when he saw my face, he could read my thoughts, and he hung his head in sadness. We embraced in the way humans do, and I cried and cried into his large chest. He then called out to his family. They have an emergency call. It's 3 owl hoots and a whistle. And before you could say Jack Robinson, they were all there. This was the first time I'd actually seen the entire family together, and they all gathered around me, very solemnly. They knew something serious was up. Peekaboo chattered away to them and pointed towards me, and they all tapped me on the shoulder 2 times. Once was for thank you for telling us what you told us, and twice for saying goodbye. As they're Normans, they had no baggage, and they were on their way as quickly as that, leaving behind their life on our farm in the twinkling of an eye to embrace pastures new. They didn't have any choice in the matter, of course. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes because this was such a beautiful story, blighted by a father's complete misunderstanding of the critter and his daughter's incredible relationship with it. Did the military come to your house? Oh yes, they came late that night. They arrived in a large army truck with very high-caliber rifles, and they were in the sylvan for a long time, several hours, I think. There were about 6 or 7 of them. They found no sign of the critter because, of course, they'd all gone by then. But they gave my dad a card, telling him to call them if he saw the creature again, and they would exterminate him. They're talking about my best friend here, said Heidi, beginning to sob inconsolably. Good. Cry, I said. It's good for you. You need to let it all out. You need to release that pain, or it'll destroy you. Believe me, I know all about it. Heidi began to weep for quite a long time. I'm just going to miss Peekaboo so much. I can't imagine my life without him. I loved him so much. Look, these things happen. Sometimes we have to move on, I said. Maybe Peekaboo and his family stayed for so long because of your incredible relationship with him. And they saw how bonded the two of you were, and they didn't have the heart to leave for his sake. But I'm sure they travel and go to places all the time, and they only stayed so long because of you. I think you're probably right. Oh, of course I am, I said. My father's the reason why I decided to run away, she said. I can't even look at him in the eyes without feeling this intense hatred and loathing for him. He's ruined my life. I'm not sure he has any idea that he's upset you so much. You shouldn't be so hard on him. He was only doing what he thought was best, even though it was dreadfully misguided. He had no idea about your friendship with Peekaboo. Did you leave a note for your parents, so at least they won't worry themselves sick about you? Yes, I did. I told them I was starting a brand new life, and I wouldn't be back. I said that calling the military to kill that critter in the woods was very vindictive. I didn't say why, of course, because my father would never have understood my friendship with Peekaboo. But I did end off the note telling my dad, you have no idea what a lousy hunter you really are, but I do. Well, I guess that got him thinking, I laughed. Look at it like this. You saved Peekaboo and his entire family from being wiped out by the military. That's got to be a good thing, surely. I suppose that is true, said Heidi, wiping away her tears. What I don't get is why you actually believe my story. That does surprise me, I have to say. Oh, I believe your story, dear. You know why? Because I've come to these parts very regularly to visit my friend in this part of the world all the time. And one day, out of the blue, a critter crossed my path fitting the description of the humanoid ape that you described to perfection. I remember that day as if it was yesterday. It shifted my view of reality completely around. I remember the creature just looked at me with wide, curious, deep-set dark eyes. It displayed no animosity, but I must admit I was very startled. On the contrary, it seemed rather congenial, and I do remember that it was covered in hazelnut hair, with, as you say, an auburn hue. And it had hair-covered breasts, and a very certain patch of white hair on its chest. I do remember that. Was the hair the shape of a crescent moon? Asked Heidi excitedly. Yes, actually I believe it was. You saw Peekaboo's mother! I can't believe it! You saw her! Fast forward to several weeks, and Heidi stayed at my home for 3 long months and found a great job in the city of Charleston, and about 3 years later she got married to a delightful man who worked as a doctor in the local town. I gather she did make up with her parents, but I don't think she ever entirely forgave her father for what happened. It would seem that Peekaboo and his family had long since gone, and possibly laid down roots elsewhere. All that happened a very long time ago, because I think I was about 40-something at the time, and now I'm in my late 60s. Heidi and I are still great friends to this day, and I did ask for very special permission to share this story with you and all your listeners, and she was in agreement on the understanding that she may remain anonymous. Of course you know that the critter that she encountered was a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Well, thank you so much for that incredible story. I just adored it. Until next time, goodbye and good night.